Thank you. And again, feel free to, ask any questions. Tonight, the focus of the conversation is helping our children engage in school. We are going to be talking about ways to help them with motivation as well as self-confidence, really gaining some autonomy skills in the home and school setting. So I'm going to share some tips tonight and strategies, as well as just, I think, some common struggles all of us as parents are having right now. And so feel free, again, if you have something that you feel like would be really helpful to add, feel free to enter it in the chat. And if you enter it just directly to me, you can make it private where no one else sees what you put in. So as we go to the first slide, I just always like to share a little bit about me. And it really is a lot of my, what I bring to the table is from being a parent myself. I have two daughters, 24 and 25. And I definitely know how rewarding parenting can be, but also how challenging at times. Most of us love our children deeply, but there's definitely days where we might not always like them. And that's definitely common, just being a parent and, kind of doing all we can and just dealing with that daily frustration. I spend a lot of my time consulting with schools and working with families and parents. And so I'm really excited to just share some of what I'm seeing tonight. We also have the Successful Parenting Podcast, and we air episodes every week to just help families, help support families, and bring different topics to the table. So as we get started, one of the things that I wanted to share tonight is really about how important it is to be aware of how we're feeling. And so one of the things that when I'm working with parenting groups, I often ask parents is to just give a little self-assessment of how they're feeling, because so often how we're feeling is going to impact our perception of how our children are doing as well as our responses. So if you would mind just sharing, and we kind of use funny scales with children, so I wanted to share these with you tonight. On this squirrel scale, how do you feel today? How would you put your feeling right now? And if you feel free just to put that in the chat, how would you say that you're feeling? Would you say you're feeling like a 1, or would you say you're feeling more maybe a 6? I know many of the children I'm working with right now are coming into my office looking like a 5. And so that's something that we're seeing across the board. So feel free just to put in what you're feeling. A 6. Awesome. I think today I was a little bit of a 5. Maybe a 2. Someone else said they're feeling like a 3. Awesome. Thanks for sharing those. I think it's a 3 too. Another 3. I think it's helpful to be in tune. So one of the things that helped me the most being a parent when my girls were in middle school and even elementary school is I would, kind of daily when I was coming home from work, just try to assess where I was, in terms of my own, anxiety, stress, mood. And one of the things I recognized that if I was really stressed or exhausted, I would have a tendency, to be more reactive, maybe be, quicker to yell, or maybe I was quicker to respond out of anxiety. So one of the things I would do is recognize if I was feeling, extra emotional, extra stressed, extra tired, I would really try to focus on one technique I would use is visualize how I wanted the next hour to go with my child. And I would literally try to behave my way into that ending. I would really try, if I felt like, having a strong reaction, I would just walk away. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit tonight. When we go to the next slide, one of the things that I created, and this is something that I share with children, and if you would like a paper copy, I have that as well. Really talking about why school is important, because I think so often I work with many children that struggle attending school. I started the school anxiety program at Alexian Brothers. I'm no longer there, but I started it many years ago and worked in the program for a long time. And these were some of the reasons I would explain to families why I viewed school engagement as important, why attendance is important. But not only attendance, building relationships and really starting to come out of your comfort zone, try new things, learn different things. And so this is something that we talk about. So often I hear children say, I don't want to go to school. It's hard. I'm exhausted. And we start to kind of flip that and talk about all the things that can actually be helpful from going to school. So on the next slide, I actually, if you go one back, just talking about your mindset, one of the reasons I created this is because if you think about how you would describe your child right now, and maybe you have multiple children, think about one or two words that you would use to describe your child or each of your children. For instance, my younger daughter, I maybe had a tendency to view her as more anxious, more, fragile. Think about how you view them and then start to ask yourself, does my view impact how I respond? So maybe you view one of your children as more fragile or more anxious. Do you have a tendency to lower the expectations for that child, or do you maintain the expectations? And so I had a young lady that was really, really struggling just with some behaviors, and she was really having a hard time, keeping her hands to herself at school. And so one of the things the parents really worked on is they worked on making sure when the child was at home, they were cueing and prompting the desired behavior they wanted. And so they were really focusing on helping the child with kind of those behaviors. So when the child was not keeping their hands to themselves, the parent would kind of stop and kind of state the expectation and really start holding the child to that. And what they found is by doing it at home, it really helped the behavior at school. And so often, sometimes our mindset is this is just how they are, or they can't handle a lot. But really, a lot of times it's learned behavior. And when we can start to model different behavior and really cue them at home, we might see something different as well. So on the next slide is something that we've talked about a lot, and that really is that children develop at different rates. And so when we were in the school refusal, school anxiety program, one thing we noticed is children would come in and parents would say to us, we don't understand why they are in this program. They are just so smart. They are just, they're so nice. We don't know why they're having these behaviors. One thing we realized is just because a child is struggling, we say the child is not trying to give us a hard time, they're having a hard time. Just because a child is struggling or maybe acting out or refusing to do something doesn't mean they're a bad child. It means we really need to work with them on possibly a certain skill, possibly regulating emotions, possibly just ways to interact. And so, one thing we talk a lot about is each child develops at a different rate, right? And so, in terms of their learning styles, children develop at different rates. In terms of their emotional development, they also develop at different rates. So, you might have a 10-year-old who is emotionally like 8, but intellectually maybe more advanced, right? And so, you might see that discrepancy between their cognitive and emotional development. So, as a therapist, what I try to do is really raise the emotional uh, a little bit, help the child maybe with regulating emotions or perspective taking, depending on what we assess that might be a need. Really trying to prompt a lot of the practice of some of these things at home as well. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. On the next slide, we talk about just some key skills. Even kids as young as pre-K, we're starting to really work on these skills with, but just really trying to increase problem solving, helping them start to figure things out, as opposed to as parents, and I did this at times, not always asking or giving advice, but asking them, what do you think you could do? I know last week when you had this, I saw you you solved it by doing this. What do you think you could do in this situation, versus always telling them what to do or giving them reassurance or advice. Having our children practice asking for help, having them practice asking their teachers, having them practice asking us for help, and allowing our children to do new things and try new things even when they're uncomfortable. And what we found with these three skills, the more they would practice, the better outcomes we saw. So I think, as a parent at home, if you start to think about how your child does in each of these areas, it can be a good thing if you feel like your child struggles to practice. Um, Even with talking to you, if a child, maybe they're in third grade and you feel like they're not talking to you appropriately, or they're not waiting for a pause to ask you something, those are good times to practice some of those skills. I'm finding with children and technology, some of the social skills seem like they're a little behind, because children aren't having as much opportunities just to connect and practice, just like even table manners, conversation skills, and some of those things. And children are saying, at least to me, that they feel like adults are on tech a lot and everyone's so busy. So if you have time and you're, eating with your child, practice, eye contact, really, being present, having conversations. And I think even if a younger child, you start with like 5 minutes, if you gradually practice, you'll see that it'll make a difference. What we're seeing just from a mental health standpoint across the board, and I think as parents, we are impacted by this as well. We are seeing an uptick since the pandemic in anxiety and depression, and some of these others. I think technology a lot with children. We're not going to focus so much on this tonight, but I'm going to touch on it a little bit. But if you have a child, again, we're also seeing mood disorders, eating disorders, and self-harm. But in terms of the technology addiction, if you have a child that gets really, really upset when you set limits, or you feel like they're engaging more in technology and less with the family, or less motivated to go to school, that's something to think about. And I'll touch on that a little bit at the end as well. So these are also some things that, children and this was with a group of middle school and high schoolers, but this is something I'm seeing across the board with all ages. And these are some things that children have reported to me cause them stress and anxiety in for them. And feel free, if you can, put in the chat, maybe one or two that you feel like your child would report. If you've heard them, depending on your child's age, say anything about what might cause them stress at school or anxiety. And I think being accepted is definitely one I hear a lot of. Somebody put expectations. Popularity, definitely. Popularity is one I hear a lot about. Expectations, fitting in. Somebody had mentioned to me and asked me the other day, what is FOMO? Fear of failure, definitely. And that's fear of missing out. And I hear a lot of children with social media and technology talk about fear of missing out on something, fear of having something, fear of being left out. Kids are wanting more things. Kids are wanting to be part of more things. And so definitely, yep, changing friendships and popularity, academic comparison. And those are definitely ones that we see. I have some middle schoolers I'm working with now, and they will spend like 2 hours putting on their makeup and focusing on how they look, because they want to look a certain way. And they're so worried about that. And so that's something that I'm hearing a lot of, is really confidence issues, as well as just really wanted to be accepted. And then the other one I hear a lot of is fear of failure. I talked about this with a young lady today. If she doesn't do really well at something, she feels like she's a failure. And we talked about, there is no such thing as perfect. It's just practicing until you get better at something. And we're going to talk a little bit about language to use around that as well. So just in terms of school refusal and school anxiety and avoidance, I'm just going to touch on that briefly. I think one of the things that I realize is that it is all it impacts all ages as well as all abilities. I have children that are gifted. I have children that struggle with learning. I have children that were doing okay a couple of years ago, and now we're really struggling, feeling overwhelmed with anxiety and stress at school, possibly to the point of not wanting to go to school. Some children have stomach aches. They get really worried about how they're going to do on a test. Some just out and out refuse and say, I don't want to go. And sometimes kids go every day, but they still have anxiety when they're at school. Sometimes they mask it so well, others may not even know they're struggling, but they come home and you see it as the parent. Maybe they're spending too much time kind of focusing on, something that went wrong, or they're focusing on something that could go wrong. And so I'm going to just talk for a little bit about, kind of why children refuse, why it becomes a pattern. And we'll touch on some strategies too. And so really, like I said, a child might come up and say they're sick. Younger children, typically, they're not sure that they're stressed or anxious. They're not in tune with that. But so often we carry stress and anxiety physically, right? So I might have backaches when I'm really, really stressed out. My back might become really tight. Some children carry it in their stomach and they get stomach aches. Some children get headaches. Some kids feel anxiety physically. So in the morning, they may feel like their heart racing. They may feel like their head spinning. And the more they work themselves up, the more that they become almost petrified to do the thing that makes them anxious. And so they just want to avoid. What we see as, like, from a treatment or school perspective, we obviously know that there's an issue when kids are accruing more and more absences, or maybe they're going to school, but they're like avoiding certain classes. But as parents, so often you might see underlying issues at home, and you might see things going on before we do. And so always communicating to your school counselor, school social worker, school nurse, or teacher is helpful if you're seeing things at home and there's things that maybe could be done at school that would help your child. For the next slide, the other things, I was talking to a group of kids recently, and we're seeing this across the board. This has become children with anxiety and stress and even mood disorders. It's really become increased. And so if your child is struggling, just because they're struggling doesn't mean that they're not going to be successful. It just means that they're struggling right now. And how do we help them through that? So often, and I think all three of you have said that, I think it's important that our children are, at times scared of being criticized, sometimes even fearful of leaving a parent. Sometimes as a parent, we might have a tendency to want to text our children, as much as we can when they're not with us, but just being mindful of sometimes that kind of feeds into the anxiety and can make it worse, especially if we're texting them when they're at school, or maybe even, a school type setting. Sometimes our children also might avoid activities where they think they may have failure. So they may avoid certain sporting events, or they may avoid certain social situations if they feel like they're not going to fit in or it's not going to go well. And those are the situations that we really want to encourage our children to still participate in. In the next slide, I'm going to touch a little bit about anxiety or stress. I try not to use the word anxiety too much because I feel like we have overused it a little bit. And really, the treatment protocol for anxiety, if you have an anxiety disorder, is in part to identify what causes you anxiety, such as, going to new places, taking a test, being evaluated, identifying what causes you anxiety, and then practicing those situations until you feel more comfortable and less anxious. So anxiety and stress is really about learning to be Learning to be uncomfortable. So I teach individuals to be comfortable being uncomfortable, tolerate healthy levels of stress, meaning that we're not overdoing it and having unrealistic expectations. Like maybe my expectations are that I'm going to do really well at everything and everyone's going to like me, versus there's going to be some things that I do well and other things that I struggle with. And not everyone is going to like me all the time, but I can handle that. So that's success versus perfection. Asking your child, what does success look like for them, and helping them identify realistic goals so that it's not to be perfect or have everyone like you. Sometimes I'll even say to children, you may have a teacher that you don't get along with or that you feel like doesn't like you. How can you manage that? Because that may happen. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to chime in. 3 things that we know make anxiety worse, and we're going to expand on this, but 3 things that make anxiety worse is avoiding things that make you anxious. I used to be anxious when I was a child of public speaking in front of a group. It caused me huge anxiety. And one of the things I would do is try to avoid situations where I would have to present or talk in front of others. But when I became an adult, I realized this was really something I wanted to overcome. And so what I had to do is I had to say, you know what, I'm going to put myself in situations where I have to do this, in small settings, and understand that my expectation is not that it's going to go well or that I'm going to do a great job. It's that I'm just going to get through it. And I would just keep doing it and doing it. And as I got more comfortable doing it, I could set the bar a little higher and my anxiety would start to go down the more comfortable I felt doing the presentations. And so often when we have anxiety, we avoid, but it really just makes it worse. And in turn, our confidence starts to drop. Uh, Reassuring our children will also make it worse. You can do it. You're going to be fine. Don't worry about it. You're so great. I know you can do this. So often that does not help anxiety. When a child is in a heightened emotional state, what really helps is cueing them down. I'm really encouraging you to, take a break or take some breaths. But if you keep interacting with them when they're emotional, whether really anxious or, upset or even angry, it's just going to cause them to become more emotional. And distraction doesn't always help. And so helping our children learn to tolerate the anxiety, and part of that as parents is managing our own anxiety and emotional reactions when our children kind of start to struggle. One thing I've used before is the example of an airplane. When you're on an airplane and there's a ton of turbulence, most often people look to the flight attendant to gauge how the flight attendant looks. So if the flight attendant looks really anxious or upset, so often you start to worry, oh my gosh, something's wrong. But if the flight attendant looks really calm, cool, and collected and isn't running around the plane asking us if we're okay, you tend to think, okay, this is not a bad situation. Our children, when they see us as calm and we're not rushing in and reacting and trying to make them feel better, our children are actually going to feel more calm. They may be angry at first because anytime we change a dynamic or a pattern with our children, it may cause them to be upset at first. But if you stay consistent for a few weeks, it will actually get better. Although it might get worse at first, it'll get better in the long term. So it takes about 2 weeks of trying something new consistently every day to really see if it works. When we're anxious, it's common people have thought distortions. Anxious people don't worry they're going to win the lottery. Anxious people don't worry everything's going to go well. Typically, we have all kinds of thoughts, and our thoughts can be really fast. And that's why if you have a child that is anxious, really cueing them, to take a break. You look really upset. When you can calm yourself, or you want to maybe co-regulate with them, help them with breathing, help them to calm down, then we can have a conversation once they're calm. And once they're kind of in a position talking to you appropriately, again, we want to really cue those appropriate social skills. They're not running around. Again, if they're younger, it's a little bit different. but we want them to be having, appropriate conversation skills with you, even when they're upset, because anxiety or being upset is not an excuse for acting a certain way. When we're anxious, we do overreact. We have huge emotions. That's why, as parents, so often when we're really anxious, and I was anxious a lot when I was parenting, because I would worry when my children were struggling and I just wanted them to be happy or okay. And so I found myself having this inclination to want to make them feel better. But so often I recognized I had to be mindful of not sending them a message that they had to be happy or okay all the time. And physical symptoms is something that most of us, when we're stressed or anxious, will feel. Our children will too. So it's not that our children are lying, or it's not that they don't have stomach aches or headaches or different things. It's teaching them how to manage it. So if you are feeling those things, teaching them how through breathing, you'll start to feel better, and you'll start to bring those physical symptoms down, as well as some other strategies I'm going to touch on. Think about this, or feel free to put in the chat, what are situations that cause your child to be uncomfortable? It could be ordering in restaurants. It could be, going to a friend's house. It could be taking a test. It could be being criticized or answering a question in class. What are situations that you would say, okay, school, what would you say about school? Would it be, and I've got a sheet, I'll show you it a little bit, I think is in here. When I would have children come to me, I would have a list of like 20 situations that occur at school, and I would have the child circle all the situations that cause them to be uncomfortable on that list, and then we would practice those. So often it's not just school, being excluded, feeling weird, definitely. And that's a common one we hear a lot, just from all children. Then thank you for that. Thank you for those. How do you being criticized? And sometimes even helping children understand kind of what criticism is, disagreements within family or fighting. Sometimes being criticized, helping children understand kind of the benefit of, and why a teacher might be giving them criticism, or why someone at home might be giving them criticism. And so often, again, if you notice your child is already upset, that's the best thing in those situations, are not to talk to them for a moment, like let things kind of calm down a little bit and then start the conversation. But when they're calm, helping them understand like the value of feedback, and even at times getting criticism. I think family conflict can definitely be one too. And then the other question is, do you tend to reinforce avoidant behavior, or do you maintain expectations? We're all going to do it sometimes, right? It's really, making a lot of excuses for our children. They can't handle ordering, so I'm going to order for them. Maybe the child's in, 5th grade. They just can't deal with this, so I'm gonna fix it for them. They miss me a lot, so I'm going to text them throughout the day. Thinking about, do you kind of feed into the anxiety due to your own worry, or do you take a step back and, kind of maybe set some of those expectations? And typically children do better with structure, and they do better with consistency when they're feeling anxious and emotional. So and again, I don't know your children's age, but sometimes having a routine at home similar to school, or even using similar language that school uses and similar expectations at home, in particular if the child's younger and even, kind of middle school age, can be helpful. It's hard to do, and it's never perfect, but it can, the more consistency and structure and routine for children that have anxiety, really all mental health issues, as well as a history of trauma, or medical issues, it will be really helpful. Children tend to thrive in that structure. Here's an example of one of the sheets I made for one of my students. And I had the student circle all the situations that cause them stress and anxiety. And and these are situations that tend to happen at school. And so helping the child identify, what causes them stress at school, and then starting to really praise when they do those situations that maybe cause them stress or cause them to be uncomfortable. It's that growth mindset, praising the process or the effort versus the outcome. So this is just one of the forms I made, and I would a lot of times tailor it to the child so the child could really identify those situations that were difficult for them. And then on the next, I know this is difficult to see, but if anyone wants to look it up, it's called the Family Accommodation Scale. And it's interesting. They have one for OCD and anxiety. And it really takes a look at, as a parent, do you tend to, provide a lot of reassurance, or do you feed into the avoidance? And it will go through and talk about alternative strategies. And again, as parents, we love our children. We want them to be healthy and happy. And so obviously as parents, our go-to is going to be to want to reassure and make them feel better. The hard part is for children with anxiety, so often that can fuel the anxiety. And if anyone has any questions or wants more detail, they can feel free to email me, or wants these slides, I can provide those as well. In terms of, school engagement, we talk about active versus avoidance tactics. And my friend Ashley had made this slide. And I love this slide because it really talks about avoidance approaches really can create more anxiety, right? So if you have a child that's anxious about answering questions in class, you might want to call the school social worker and say, don't have them answer any questions in class ever. And this probably isn't going to be helpful long term. But what you can say is, we're going to take a moment to pause on, having the child be called on. But in the meantime, we're going to be having the child practice answering questions with the therapist or with the school social worker in your office. And then we're going to look that over time, the child's going to become more confident as they practice. And then we might have the teacher ask the child, a question that maybe the child gets in advance, so the child can practice answering, or things like that. Avoidance doesn't really solve the problem. You might avoid pain in the moment, but what's really going to happen is you're going to see it grow, and it's going to cause more suffering down the road. And, again, it feeds the anxiety, and avoidance will just allow the problems to grow and grow. And if you, really focus on avoidance tactics in elementary and middle school, by the time the child is in high school, they are going to be just avoiding everything because they don't believe that they can manage or handle being uncomfortable. So an example of avoidant coping might be avoiding a social situation because I may become uncomfortable in the social situation. I'm working with so many children of all ages right now that have social anxiety and are so worried about just having conversations with peers and in front of others that they do so much of it in text and online that they really struggle. And again, really working with them at home on having those conversations. Example of active coping in that exact same situation would be practicing smaller social interactions and coping when feeling uncomfortable. So focusing on realistic goals for social situations. If you have a younger child, maybe having a get together with another parent, and a child, and practicing, and also being mindful of, really cueing the child, and really talking about, talking to others, some social skills, and just helping them learn to engage. For the next slide, and these are, just in terms of reassurance. I know I work with a lot of families that their children struggle engaging in school. I had one mom, and she had, I think the child was in second grade, and I actually did a car ride with them. And the mom, we were in the car, and the child looked really anxious, and the mom became really anxious because she's like, in her mind, she was like, here we go again. This is going to happen again. And so the mom started asking the child, are you okay? Are you okay? You don't look okay. Are you okay? The more the mom asked that, the more the child started to get more and more upset. And pretty soon the mom believed that the child couldn't handle going to school, and she wanted to take her back home. And we talked about, why the mom had that reaction. And the mom really wanted to reassure the child. She wanted to make the child feel better. But in turn, what she was doing is sending a message that potentially the child couldn't handle going to school. If you have a child that is an information seeker, they're asking you one question, they're maybe asking it twice, you're giving an answer, and they're accepting that answer. Or do you have a child that maybe asks you the same question over and over? When you answer the question, it doesn't help them feel less anxious. Often ask multiple people the same question, uh, asking until they get the answer they want. As a parent, this is a great way to see, do you have a child that's maybe more seeking information, or do you have a child that is just seeking that reassurance? I had one child that kept asking the parent, do you love me? If you love me, kiss my forehead. And the parent found themselves like repeatedly kissing the child's forehead. I also have some parents that believe that the children, they're only happy when they're on electronics. So they struggle setting any boundaries around electronics because they feel like that is a reassurance for the child. And that is what helps the child's anxiety, when in turn, so often, again, that can make it worse. So for the next slide, decreasing reassurance, just in terms of, sometimes it's okay to say to your child, I'm not sure of the answer. Who could you ask at school? Maybe the child's really upset with the teacher, and you could say, that sounds really difficult. How could you talk to the teacher about it? Versus making the conversation all between the parent and the child, really prompting the child to gain some strategies to cope at school. You already know the answer. I already provided that answer. I'm not gonna answer it again. What if you didn't do your homework perfectly? What would happen? And sometimes I'll say, like, what's the worst thing that could happen? I was talking to a high schooler today, and the high schooler got a D on a test, and the high schooler was really, really upset. And we talked about, it doesn't mean that the child is not doing well in the class. It means that the child got a D. What do we need to do next time, to problem solve it? Maybe you did make a mistake. Sometimes families will, at the dinner table, each person will say what's something that went well today and what's something we totally each screwed up today, normalizing that we all make mistakes. What do you think? How could you handle that? That would be helpful with not providing reassurance, and things not to say. I know everything's going to be great. Don't worry about it. You're just being irrational. You better do what I say. I'll just do it for you. You'll be great. It's going to be a great day. Sometimes I'll even say, today may be really difficult for you. How can you manage? What are some things that you can do if you do become stressed? Who could you talk to at school, and what are some things you could do? And so really continuing to send the message of, I have confidence that you can handle difficult things. So for the next slide, one of the things we also do, and again, depending on the child's age, something called cognitive behavior therapy, where we're helping the child recognize, just because they have a thought doesn't mean the thought's true. I could think I'm a pink elephant. It doesn't mean I'm a pink elephant. I talked to a child today. She said, I have a huge forehead. We talked about, that thought and, it being irrational. And again, just because you have a thought doesn't mean it's true. How do we start to look at the evidence? How do we start to reframe the thought? When you're anxious, and we've all been anxious, we don't typically worry that everything's going to go great. We do what's called catastrophizing. We think of all the bad things that can happen. We think of everything that can go wrong, and we kind of swim around in it. So helping the child or ourselves really start to look at the evidence. What are the facts versus our emotions? And then we also do a lot with managing our physical symptoms, learning to manage, whether it's maybe we become really tight, maybe our stomach starts to hurt, maybe our breathing becomes quicker. How do we start to manage those physical symptoms? And sometimes I might even have children do things where, like, they run in place, or they shake their head side by side, which some of these are called what's called interoceptive exercises. And then we have them, once they get those physical symptoms, we practice just sitting and allowing our body to calm, and breathing, and how to sit. And also, if we have a child that's struggling going to school, we will work with them on gradually making a plan so that they can hit targets every day. If you have a child that's going to school but struggling to engage in school, we will help them, again, doing small things that make them uncomfortable, because ultimately all children want to be successful, but a lot of our children don't believe they can be successful. And so anything we can do to help them find success, as well as connect to adults, have at least one champion in the building, as well as to peers, is going to be key in working on this approach. This is something else I use. And if the child is younger, I might just do 1 through 3, but really helping them understand their stress or their anger rating, whatever word they want to use, helping them understand their physical symptoms. What are those physical symptoms? Maybe at a 1, I have an anxious thought. A 2 might be the anxious thoughts are getting quicker. A 3 might be that I'm starting to get sweaty, and so on. Start to think about thoughts that you have, and you might take this and just do it to one typical situation, and then really working on different coping strategies. And then for the next slide, this was one I've used a lot. When I was in the program, I would have children come home, come to the program after school or the next day. And one thing that I noticed is I would say, "How was your day at school?" So often they would say it was awful, it was terrible, it was the worst day ever. And a lot of the children I work with are very kind of all or none thinking. And so it's either great or it's terrible. And so I was really helping them to see the gray. So what I would do is I came up with a sheet, and I would have them throughout the day write one thing that happened during each period of their day. So for instance, I had a mom picking up her son at 3, and the mom saw the son was upset coming out of school, and she right away started to get anxious and said, "What happened?" before the son had a chance to even say anything. And the son said, "The whole day was terrible. I sat by myself. People made fun of me. It was awful." The mom right away got really upset. She started saying, "Oh my God, this is terrible. This is awful." And she called the school, and she was upset that this had happened. But what had happened is that's reacting out of emotion, right? And so what we did is I had the young man write one thing that happened during each hour of his day, right? One fact, one piece of evidence. You took a test, you sat next to somebody, you played a game, and I had them write across the paper one thing and had them rate their stress level during each of those times of the day. Well, what ended up happening is when we did that, the child graphed it out, and I said, "So now that you see this, how was your day?" And the child said, "My day was actually okay, but nobody came to sit with me at lunch." And I said, "Well, what could you do tomorrow if that happens? What are different things you could do?" And the child came up with different things. And so, and I share this because what had happened is the parent had really run and reacted, but really taking a look at, even though something really difficult might happen and your child might look upset, helping them reframe, kind of like using those cognitive behavioral skills, helping them see that it really was that maybe one thing happened during the day. So for the next slide, just some strategies overall, that we've talked about today. And just to clue in on is just being mindful as a parent of your own stress levels. If you're struggling with your mental health, making sure that you're seeing a therapist. Sometimes I'll have parents call me and the child will refuse to come to therapy, and I'll encourage the parents to come, because I think it's so important that as parents, we're taking care of ourselves and we're working on some different strategies, identifying what are those situations that cause you to emotionally react. Maybe they cause you to yell. Maybe they cause you to want to rush in and like reassure your child. I know when my child looked really sad when she was younger, I had a tendency to feel really sorry for her. So I wanted to make her feel better. And I had to get really in touch with that, because reacting out of that would not be helpful. Think about a few goals you have for your child. Maybe you want your child to be more respectful to others. Okay. Maybe that's one. Maybe you want your child to engage more in school, or to do their homework, or to try more on their schoolwork, right? Think about one goal that you have for your child. Maybe you want your child to be able to handle uncomfortable situations. Think about one goal you have, and then start to think about, do your reactions as a parent kind of help you with that goal, right? If you are wanting your child to be more respectful, but you let your child maybe, talk to you not very respectfully or, such, then how are you getting towards that goal? And so thinking about, that purposeful parenting versus emotionally reactive. As parents, we do the best we can. We're exhausted. We all emotionally react. We all yell at times. As parents, we're doing the best we can. I've made every mistake possible. It's really about continuing to kind of focus on what we're wanting to teach our children through our parenting. And honestly, one of the things that I've learned as my children have become adults is that they learned from my modeling. I don't know how much they learned from any lectures I've given them, but they both act just like me in different ways. And so if we want to teach our children behaviors, let's say table manners, then we expect that at the table. If they want their privilege, we really practice those behaviors and responses. And the more we practice with them, you're going to see better growth. And some children will, when you set an expectation around things, maybe it's electronics, maybe it's something that they, are really upset about. If you withhold from them, they might really ramp up. I have children that are the sweetest children that will scream and yell and throw things and hit, and sometimes even hit themselves when parents start to set limits. What's important to remember, again, it takes about 2 weeks. And so you are going to see really big behaviors at times, but really staying calm and sticking to a plan, you will see those behaviors will go down in a couple weeks. Structure can be really helpful, and structure can just look like, and I think when we go to the next slide, there'll be an example, but it can just look like, even creating a visual of 1 or 2 expectations. My expectation is you go to school each day. My expectation is that, your homework is done each night. I'm not going to ask you every single day necessarily, but we're going to check in. And, if these things aren't done, if you're in high school or middle school, then this is what's going to happen. If you have a child that you're concerned they don't have the executive functioning skills, they might really need to work on some time management skills, putting a little schedule together after school of, when they're going to get their homework done, before games or before fun time. Just being able to communicate how we communicate with each other as parents or with other adults or with our children, again, is teaching them. So if we want our children not to yell, we have to be mindful of refraining from yelling and so on. And, we all have obstacles. So for me, when I was coming home from work late at night, sometimes from a long day, I knew that I would be more likely to want to yell or get really upset if my child wasn't doing something they were supposed to be doing. So I had to have a plan so that didn't happen. And one of the things I really did is what I shared in the beginning is about visualizing how I want the next 30 minutes to go and behaving my way into that ending. If I was upset or felt like I really needed to talk to my child about something, but I was feeling exhausted, then I would table it for the next day. And 9 times out of 10, I would react totally different the next day. So here's an example, and this is more for an older child, but I just wanted to share an example. If you have a child struggling to go to school, one thing families will do a lot of times, or struggling with behavior, maybe they're getting in trouble in school or they're having a hard time getting work done. And again, even if the child is anxious or not feeling well, these expectations will help a ton, even though they may not like them. And they may say things like, you're punishing me for my mental health or my physical health, helping them understand that when kids are struggling, the more structure we can provide, the more our children will thrive. And so this was one example of a child that was having a hard time getting to school. The child was in middle school. But if you have a child maybe with behavioral issues, you could, put a target. Even I had one child that had extreme anxiety at the dinner table and would engage in all these behaviors. And the family, instead of focusing on, oh, this is anxiety, so the child can't control it, the family really focused on expectations for table manners if they wanted to earn their privilege after dinner. So these are some examples, but it works really nice to frame it as it's your choice. You don't have to, but if you choose to do this, this is what's going to happen. And these are just some coping skills that we use, that you can use with your children, helping them, kind of name different emotions. There's no good or bad emotion. You can feel happy or scared or sad or angry or, ashamed. There's all kinds of emotions. We're not trying to take away an emotion or necessarily help a child feel better. We're trying to encourage children, it's okay to feel whatever your feeling is. There is no good or bad feelings. And so sometimes just letting our children talk and listening to them, not all the time, but making at least like a half an hour every day if possible to just sit and have like, you could have make a child's favorite drink. You could do it over dinner, but just asking them, how are you? How was your day? Open-ended questions that don't involve what kids love to say is nagging. Being mindful of reactions. And then some of these other ones. The other one I really love is breathing, which is kind of an obvious one, but so often when kids are anxious, they have a tendency to kind of sit like this or curl up in a ball, teaching them that like how they sit will really actually help their breathing, which will really bring down their stress and their anxiety levels. And then if a child is really upset about something that happened, having them write down all the evidence or the facts of a situation, and so they can see it through a better perspective. And then on, these are just some, we have a couple more slides, and these are just some closing tips. Is really being supportive, holding the expectations, and really focusing on self-regulating as parents. The more I self-regulate, the more my child is going to. And so avoiding reacting when the child is heightened. If you have a child that is really in like a tantrum, allowing the child just to have a couple moments as long as they're safe. And when the child's calmed down, talking about kind of expectations and, what's going to happen next. This is, if you have any concerns about your child, you have an amazing school district with D47. These are some things that you can do is you really connect with a school counselor or teacher. I would always advise not texting your child when they're at school, not messaging them. But if your child is upset and they're reaching out to you and they do have a device, encouraging, maybe calling the counselor and not responding to them. And then these are just some other ones as well. And again, if you are concerned, if your child is all of a sudden there's a shift where they don't want to be in school, you're seeing they're having huge reactions in the morning, they're not wanting to go, they're stressed out, they're spending way too much time getting ready, or they feel like they don't have friends, or they struggle connecting, these are times where it might be good to see a professional, talk to somebody, even if you don't want to bring the child, doing some parenting sessions just to focus on ways to really help that child gain those emotional skills at home. If anyone's interested in our podcast, this is our podcast, and we have a workbook as well. And if there's any episodes you would ever like us to cover, we're always interviewing new guests from around the country. And then in Crystal Lake on the last slide, we have about 30 therapists at the Center for Emotional Wellness, and we are in Crystal Lake and Arlington Heights. And so feel free if you need anything to reach out, and we would love to help. And I believe this is recorded. So I know this is going to be shared with members of the district. And so, we look forward to helping and partnering with you in any way. So thank you all for coming, and thank you for helping me tonight. I definitely needed it with the Zoom. And again, if you have any questions, definitely reach out.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to everybody, and thank you, Jackie, for joining us and sharing your insights. This was recorded, and we will include it in our Focus on 47 newsletter and have that available. And again, yeah, you can reach out to me as well if you need the slides or any sort of follow-up. So since it's just about 8 o'clock, we made it just under time, and thank you again.
Thank you.